Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here. I just want to kind of share with you this evening, as we had Palm Sunday yesterday. And I know a lot of you had stopped up over the weekend to get your palms. And so many live streaming churches were having Mass over the weekend. So I'm hoping that you and your family were able to join OLG on Facebook Live. It's also up at our website too, olg.cc, or another church to celebrate Christ's triumphant entry into Jerusalem. So we know that we celebrate Palm Sunday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and then Easter Sunday. And those are the big ones that we celebrate, and we focus on those. But I'd like to focus tonight on the days in between those events. What happened on Holy Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday? That time in between. Do we know what happens? Well, sure we know. It says in the Gospel. So I went and looked at the Gospel this weekend, and if the authors wrote the Gospels chronologically, which I'm sure they did, a lot took place between Jesus being welcomed into the city and Jesus breaking bread with apostles at Passover. Let's see. So I focused on the Gospel of Mark. Let me turn that down a little bit. I don't need that coming on anymore. I went and looked at the Gospel of Mark, and specifically chapter 11 through 14. And after they came into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, they were welcomed and everything. They went back and stayed with Mary and Martha in Bethany. Bethany was about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, and so it didn't take them too long to walk back to Bethany to spend the night there. And then, so the next morning, they traveled from Bethany back to Jerusalem, and they went to the temple, and Jesus started turning over the temple, turning over tables, telling the vendors to leave and to get out of there. Some viewed this as an aggressive act, but Jesus felt like he needed to get the attention of the people, because the temple at that time, they were focused on selling and preparing for Passover instead of keeping that temple a sacred place for prayer. And so Jesus was frustrated with that, and he needed to make a statement and have them really understand what the temple was for, and how frustrated it was for Jesus. So that was the next day. So if we think about it, Monday. Then Tuesday, the next day, the Jesus and the disciples went back into the temple to Jerusalem. And upon entering, especially after the previous day, the high priest came up and they questioned him. They were demanding answers, and instead Jesus didn't answer them. Instead, he was speaking in parables. He was talking about two sons, and he was I'm trying to think of the other ones. I'm having a mind blank right now. But anyway, he was speaking in parables, and no clear-cut answers. And when the Pharisees were asking him and questioning about those parables, they couldn't understand either. They didn't have an answer for those stories. So then some of the Pharisees were sent to trap Jesus into saying something false or incriminating. That way they could arrest him. But Jesus didn't fall into those traps. Every question that the Pharisees had asked, Jesus had a great answer for them, so that way they would not be entrapped. So they wouldn't have the grounds to arrest him. And so during this time, Jesus was winning over some of the crowds by his stories and the fact that he was standing up to the Pharisees and pointing out that they don't know. They were supposed to be the experts in the law, and here they didn't have very many answers for these questions that Jesus was answering. So the people were standing behind Jesus, and at the same time, the priests were starting to be frightened of him because they didn't want Jesus to continue speaking to the crowds, embarrassing them, and maybe gathering up enough crowds that he might incite a riot. So, excuse me. So there were a lot of things going on here. And remember, this is all happening in a couple day span time period. So there really wasn't a lot of time here. So that's important to remember. Then in Mark 13, it tells of how Jesus was sitting in the Mount Olives, and a couple of his apostles came and joined him. It was Peter, James, John, and Andrew. They came up here and they wanted to know more. They had questions about what was going on. Again, this was before Passover. This was before the Last Supper. And Jesus continues to tell them that they should be preparing for. I can imagine the apostles were in disbelief of what Jesus was saying and frightened at the same time. Jesus spends a good amount of time with them, continuing to teach and prepare the apostles for what's to come. Now, while all of this is going on here on the Mount of Olives. Well, separate place here. At the same time, the chief priests were trying to figure out a way to arrest Jesus without any incident and to have him put to death. Now, the festival of Passover was getting ready to start, and so many people would be coming from the surrounding towns to celebrate in this festival of Passover. So the crowds would be filled. The last thing that they wanted was Jesus continuing to preach and get a bunch of followers, and then with the possibility of Jesus inciting a riot, and then the priest would be overthrown. So that's the last thing that they wanted. They needed a plan to be able to arrest Jesus in where it was secluded and quiet. So here comes Judas, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas arranges for the information to be passed to the priests, so the priests would know where Jesus was going to be, alone, in the quiet, where there would not be a lot of crowds around. So Judas provided that information for them in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. The trap was set, and all the priests could do now was wait for the time to come. So, and here we have Judas, one of the followers that is going to come back to the Passover after doing that, after arranging this and having the 30 pieces of silver. He's going to go to the Passover, and then that's what we celebrate there on Holy Thursday. We celebrate that last breaking of bread, and unfortunately, Judas cannot participate in that. Jesus kind of calls him out in front of everybody, and Judas leaves at that time. So my point is that with all of our focus on Palm Sunday, and then nothing until the Last Supper for Holy Thursday, and then Good Friday and Easter Sunday, there's so much more that is encompassed in that story. So whether you go to the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John, there are gospel stories of Jesus preaching to not only his disciples, but the crowds as well in the temple. And there's a lot that goes on. Jesus is not making any friends, and with the high priest, that is. And he knew that going into Jerusalem at this time was going to be tricky. He knew what he needed to do, and he knew that he wasn't going to be making friends with the priests by his words and his actions. He knew that going in there with his apostles, this was a time of turmoil, and it was going to be interesting of how everything played out and the reactions of the apostles. Some had no idea, some had a little bit of idea. That way, some had an idea that it was of what was to come, but they didn't really understand the gravity of everything, especially with one of their brothers, their 12 brothers that had been following him, has betrayed him. So just in finding that out, there was so much information, and so that can help build on the passion of our week. So I encourage you to look at one of the Gospels, and just read a couple of those chapters that are in between Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem to the Holy Thursday Passover meal. So just kind of look at that, pray about it, and I just don't want that piece to get lost, because there was a lot of teaching and praying going on at that time. So I just wanted to kind of touch base real quick on that. We will have Mass tomorrow at noon, and then we will have Mass on Holy Thursday at 7 p.m. Both of them will be live streamed on Facebook, and then they'll be uploaded to our website at olg.cc immediately following. So, all right. Thanks for tuning in again. I hope all of you are staying safe, and have a blessed Easter week. And hopefully we'll see you live at our live streamed masses here this week. All right. Have a good night.